Welcome back to Talking Leadership. I'd like to start the podcast by sharing the view of what excellence in leadership looks like from my guest today.
I think an excellent leader has a way of being able to connect the dots and help that person to find that internal buy-in, that they're not doing it because they have to, but because they actually want to and they feel compelled to.
So by way of introduction, my guest today is Chandell Labbozzetta. She has a background in sales, business development, and is a mindset master trainer and coach. She's also a motivational speaker, and she is the author of Confident Closing, Sales Secrets That Grew a Business by 400% in 6 months and How They Can Work for You. And last but not least, she is the founder of Life Puzzle Proprietary Limited. As always, I'd like to thank you for joining the conversation. And so enough of me talking, I'll hand over to Chandell, and I hope you enjoy the podcast.
I'll definitely give you the Cliff Notes version. As we get into this, my background, as you mentioned in the introduction, was actually in corporate sales and marketing and business development. And many years ago, I actually suffered what a lot of people would call a professional burnout or a nervous breakdown. And so I was a high performer, type A personality, always striving for excellence and success and looking to climb that corporate ladder. And unfortunately, I had this underlying internal dialogue about not being good enough, not being enough. And despite huge amounts of success, I was always looking at the percentage of things not achieved as opposed to the ones that were achieved. And so through a series of different events, I co-founded this business with my mum, Teresa, who unfortunately we lost to pancreatic cancer a couple of years ago. But really the journey came out of the breakdown that I experienced and some mentors who had told me about neuro-linguistic programming, which is an art and science on how we use the language of our mind in order to affect our results and our behaviors. And after taking some trainings, I realized that I had been able to not only transform some of my results, but also I was able to fire what I call the itty bitty shitty committee. They're the group of people that sit on your shoulder and tell you why you can't have what you want, or why you're never going to get your goals, or why you can't succeed. And so that underlying inner voice and that inner dialogue that was always sabotaging my results was finally fired. And I got really passionate about wanting to be able to share some of those tools and resources with other people who may be struggling in a similar way. So we're nearly 18 years into our journey now, and we've been able to help a lot of people. We believe that sales is the number one life skill, and that is because there is 3 important sales that we make. The first sale is the sale we make to ourselves, that we can do it, that we are worthy, that we can achieve whatever we put our mind and our action to. The second sale is the sale of influence, where we converse and share our ideas in an influential way with people around us. So whether that's, talking to your boss about, why you deserve that salary increase during your PDR or what have you, or even something as simple as, winning the argument with your child about the fact that it's now the time to go to bed. And then of course there's that third sale, which everybody's familiar with, which is that transactional sale, where we talk about, how do we, align values and exchange products and services for dollars and engagement.
Interested to ask you then, what's your definition of leadership?
Leadership is really about being able to know what is the common goal and to, pace and lead the people that are contributing to that goal to provide guidance, support, collaboration. And so to me, I think that sales gets a little bit of a bad rap. A lot of people see it, they've had a really poor experience. Usually they've had a really poor experience with a salesperson where they've felt manipulated or coerced into something that they didn't want to experience or that they didn't want to buy. And to me, I think that sales is really the art of influence, which, there are lots of alignments when it comes to leadership. And so to me, I think that there's lots of parallels.
In your circumstance, again, with 2 decades of experience in this field, and the fact that you've been a co-founder of an organization, do you believe that this when we're talking, and again, we might be looking for a difference where none exists, but potentially when you talk about leadership and the leaders that you've had a chance to interact with and yourself, do you think when you look at their styles, how they carry themselves as a leader, that they might argue, and this is subjective to you, of course, but when you've seen them, do you think they separate the leadership function from that sales function? Yeah, a good salesperson not only sells you the pitch for why you should buy a product or a good or service, but they're trying to sell you the almost the business case for why this option is better than the other option, and amongst 100 different options that you might have. And ultimately, and this is being fair to those in the sales community, that it's ultimately my decision whether or not I spend money or not spend money on something. And so influence is one thing, but at the end of the day, nobody's putting a gun to your head and saying, buy this or else. You make
buy
that
or die. Yes.
yeah. So do you believe that the salespeople, the sales leaders that you've met, do you think they pass out the difference between the sales side of their skill set and the leader side of that? Do you think they're two different worlds, or are they a melding of the two?
Look, I think, it's a very fair question, Eric, in the sense that, as I said before, I think a lot of people see, sales and leadership as being separate. I think that's the norm rather than, the standard the other way around. And so you asked a little bit more about getting granular on what leadership is and where the parallels are. I think it really comes down to intention. From my perspective, the leaders that I've interacted with, if I sort of think about the people that I've either reported to being they were my leader, or whether I've been leading someone or watching my clients lead other people, if I had to look for a particular theme or a pattern that I think worked the best as far as, ensuring that, these leaders were not only getting outcomes, because I think there's a lot of really great leaders out there that get outcomes, but they don't necessarily have the buy-in from their people in the same way that they'd like to. And so for me, leadership is really about not only recognizing the common goals and helping to pace and lead people to them. It's really about how do I ensure that this person actually, finds their connection for themselves about being bought into that common goal? Because like you said, at the end of the day, no one's holding a gun to your head, and it's not your decision to buy, or it's not the leader's decision whether that person's going to buy in or not. Everybody has free will. But I think an excellent leader has a way of being able to connect the dots and help that person to find that internal buy-in, that they're not doing it because they have to, but because they actually want to and they feel compelled to.
Yeah, that's a nice way of talking about that. It's been put to me, the art form of leadership, that if you can influence those that you're leading and they're doing things because they see the benefit outside of taking a paycheck home, that we're talking about different levels of leadership. And again, why I do these discussions, and you brought something up that's interesting I hadn't thought about, is how do you define effectiveness? And we'll talk about this in measuring success in a second, but seeing as you brought it up now, let's talk about it now, I guess. It's interesting that you can get leaders that are trying to achieve outcomes, never quite get there, or like myself in the advocacy space, you're just trying your best to represent the interests of an industry, not always necessarily getting what people might call the win every time, but being in the fight is just as critical as not having been in the fight, because if you don't stand up and be counted, then what does anyone know about what your headspace is at? And 100% agree, you're going to get leaders that achieve and maybe overachieve if that's even possible, but they don't necessarily have the people there. So it makes for an interesting dynamic of what do we really call effectiveness, and then to what degree are you bringing your people along. People's motivations for being at work are all very different. I have met, and I'm sure you've met, people that are in roles because they want a paycheck and they're happy to do the job until something else comes along. It's, they'll be professional, but they're not invested in the work that's being done. I think that's always the trick. And on that, just let me ask you, because you're a co-founder of a business, and I'll, with some indulgence from you, maybe put you up in the category of entrepreneur as well as identified leader, that do you think the people that play in that space of founding businesses look at leadership in a slightly different way? Was that something that was conscious in your mind, or is it only something you think about when someone like myself asked you the question directly?
No, look, it's definitely something that's always conscious in my mind. I think that, particularly in the entrepreneur space, as opposed to, leaders in organizations where they're employed to occupy a leadership role, I think that there's a learning curve that every leader goes on in terms of finding their own style and, figuring out what they want to actually represent, what's their intentionality as a leader. And people have different measures of what those things are. And sometimes those measures are different from what their team's expectations are. And this is one of the reasons why I always talk about getting the buy-in of the team. Because if you're a leader and you're getting the results, but your team doesn't have any rapport with you, or they've got no connection to you, you might be getting those results, but for how long? Because people will only commit to what they're actually bought into. They'll only be motivated by things that they're inspired by. And actually, as an analogy, I'll share with you that I published a book a few years ago called Confident Closing. And originally I wanted to call the book Feeding Salt to Horses. We decided not to do that because, obviously from a marketing perspective, if you have to explain the title of your book, it's not very effective. However, the premise behind it is still part of the book, in the sense that, we've all heard the analogy, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. However, if you know what salt to feed to the horse, then by the time you get it to the water, it will drink because it wants to and it's thirsty, not because we're trying to drown it in the water. And I think some leadership styles are very much about drowning the horses, and some, might be more effective in the sense where, those leaders have found the right connection of messaging and, what it means for the individuals in their team to then contribute to the overall team goal. So that's my thoughts on that.
I don't think you have to be a psychologist to work out that there's something in that about those terrible leaders, because we've all met them. And, for those listening, Chandell smiling very, very ear to ear on that one. I tend to agree. I think you can get a lot more from trying to bring people with you than trying to be coercive to one degree or another. So measuring success for you, Chandell, what does that look like?
For me personally, or how I like to teach it with teams, or
for you, yeah.
Look, for me personally, I as I mentioned before, as part of my history, I've always been a person who, is driven by outcomes. And so, to me, I think that if an outcome is defined and working towards achieving that, being able to deal with some of the obstacles that come up along the way and, collaboratively work towards, ensuring that we navigate those obstacles and still get to an outcome, that's something that's very important to me, for me personally. And so for my style of leadership, I think, what gets measured gets done. And so, as being, very clear on the outcomes and the steps and the things that people need to do in order to contribute to that, that's something that's important to me. And, I believe in things like, morning routines and, having a good understanding between, how to set yourself up for success. And I, for me personally, I think that that's something that, I share with my team quite openly and encourage them to find things that work for them, so that they're also able to, hit those targets or those outcomes while still enjoying the process of doing that.
Yeah, fair enough. And always an art form in doing that. Look, disclosed quite a bit about your background and how you got here, and I very much appreciate that. Let me ask you something a bit more about your pathway in leadership again, and this is around this idea and of why I've included in the podcast is I think it's worth teasing this out from different individuals. So I'll put it this way: making decisions and being the person who ultimately is responsible for X, Y, Z has sometimes been couched as being a lonely road. So I've looked at it and I haven't labeled it this way because I know someone else has. So I go down this lonely road of leadership idea. Is it really a lonely road of leadership, or as lonely as you make it?
I'm much more of the opinion that it's as lonely as you make it. I think that there are definitely some elements that can, be lonely if you choose to put yourself in different communities and connect with other leaders. I think that there's a lot that can be shared in terms of the collaboration if you're a part of the right networks or you connect with the right people. I think that personally, I've seen some leaders and entrepreneurs, make the mistake of, creating a need for validation, appreciation from their team. And so when that is not forthcoming, then they can create beliefs about the fact that they're either not a good leader, or they feel like they're lonely, or, I think it's definitely a choice. Like most things in life, it's definitely a choice as to how much you engage in it being a lonely road. It also depends on, what the definition for the individual is, in my opinion. It may be that you're a sole leader, meaning you're making most of the decisions. If you have a leadership team, then there's collaboration in that also. So it really just depends on the intentionality or the goal, in my opinion.
In that response, I picked up this idea of looking at your networks and looking at the people that you're with. So I'll put it to you this way: in maybe the leadership speak, mentoring. So do you have mentors? Have you sought mentors out? And again, we'll go back to this idea of granularity. Have they mostly been informal or formal? As in, by formal, I mean you've gone and set up a proper formal relationship. We meet once a week at this time for however many months. So is that been part of your makeup as developing into leadership?
Absolutely, 100%. And so, one of the things that I often say is that if I'm a coach, a mentor, and a trainer, for me to not invest in that, it's a little bit it's a little bit hypocritical in my opinion. And I've met some, coaches, mentors, who think they know everything and they don't invest in that. So, I would often have a little bit of a chuckle about that. Carl Jung's perception is projection. Pointing the finger out, there's three fingers pointing right back at me. So, one of the things that I've always felt very strongly about is having mentors. And you asked if I had formal mentorships and coaches versus informal ones, and the truth is that I've had a combination of both. I don't just have one coach, I have several, and I have them specialists in different things. So for example, as a leader, I'm very, very much aware of the fact that my own physical well-being and my mental well-being can affect how I lead other people. So I have a coach in the area of breath work and to deal with some of the emotional or psychological challenges that may come up, and some techniques around that. I have a business network that I'm a part of, a board that I report to, and I also have a couple of mentors who are seasoned entrepreneurs and leaders in the corporate space who I will call on if I need advice or the opportunity to externally process some of my decision making with someone who I know has been through similar challenges. So I'm a big advocate for not trying to do these things on your own.
It sounds like you've really hit that mentoring thing and made the most of it as much as you can. I think it's and this is a personal view, I think they're critical to building not just a better leader but a better human being, because I think we've all met these people that think they have an answer to every problem that conceivably might come up. I don't myself subscribe to that view of the world. I know there's shit I don't know, and I'm happy to seek it out. Not seek shit out. Sorry, I'll edit that out. I'm happy to seek the wisdom of others, because having a naysayer, even someone that puts the counter to you, helps you open up possibilities for what might happen if I take path A versus path B. And whilst I personally am an advocate for skill sets around strategic thinking and foresight, I mean, looking at what are your possible futures and then going for the ones that are actually achievable is a critical thing. But I don't think the most effective leaders don't get there without reference to others. So in my circumstance, like you, I've sought out through most of my career more towards the latter end of it, because when I was young and naive, and I thought I could come up with an answer to almost every problem, and you quickly work out that you can't. So as I sort of matured into the world of work, and not leadership roles, but just being out in the world and being in amongst what it means to work, you learn a few things. And I went down that pathway of more informal mentors and peer level networks. So you talked about having mentors, both formal and informal. My reliance has very much been on a peer network. Would you say that it's made you a better, more effective leader by having that network?
Yeah, absolutely. And just on that, informal versus, formal, I think I'm of the belief that when people are invested in something, then, they'll show up 100%. And that investment sometimes is of time, sometimes it's an investment of money. And whichever the listeners might choose to, look into or engage in further, personally, I believe that, having commitment to something and having that accountability often is assumed naturally when there's an investment of some sort being made. And without that investment, what can sometimes happen with just peer groups is that, everybody starts out with a great intention, life gets in the way. Oh, we'll meet on Thursday at 3:00 every week and we'll chat about this thing. And, someone has a child that was sick, so can we cancel, or I'm not coming in, and often sometimes without that, little bit of rigor, routine and commitment around it, things can sort of fall out. And And that's one of the reasons why I opted to have both formal and informal, because when we have a formal paid engagement, then that person is being invested in, or that those group of people are being invested in by myself. And so there's an expectation that everybody's going to show up and play 100%. And that's what's important to me. And as far as, gathering information, getting feedback, having that consistency around that, I think is really important too.
Chandell, this has been a great conversation, but I want to tease out, if I can, a little bit. Leader capabilities. What do you think are the most critical ones for you? So not what you think others might think of it. You're in the hot seat. You've got 2 decades of experience in a business. What are they? What are the critical ones?
Yeah, look, I think, and we've sort of alluded to it a little bit in terms of leader capabilities. You had mentioned before, self-reflection, and I think that one of the key things that's really important in leadership is the ability to have an internal and an external awareness. I think that there's some people who have amazing external awareness, so they know to look and to manage the things that are going on outside of them, but they struggle with self-reflection, so they're not often assessing how they showed up for that or how they contributed to the outcome that they got to. And then there are some leaders that are all internal, in the sense that they're assessing themselves based on their own criteria and how they feel about certain things, and they might be completely dismissing the feedback that might right in front of their face with their teams, whether it be through behaviors or words or lack of performance, or even potentially lack of engagement. And so internal and external factors, I think, are very, very important.
Do you think it's easy for people that report to you to give you that honest feedback about what it is that you're doing? Do you think it's easier when you've got a team that's invested, or just in general, is it difficult to give feedback up the line? I ask this as someone who finds that extremely difficult. I don't mind being given feedback my way. I'm happy to take it, but for me to be the person being the judge of someone else, I find it extremely difficult. There's just something in me that, and I don't know why this is, but I'm happy for anyone to critique the hell out of me. I don't care. If I get offended, I'll wake up tomorrow alive and well. It's okay to be offended, but I don't necessarily want to cause offense to someone else. So I
don't think anybody does.
No.
It's a common itty bitty shitty committee criteria. It's sort of like, oh well, I don't want to say that because I might hurt that person's feelings. And I recently was chatting with one of the informal networks or the informal mentors, and a lady who's in family business said, you definitely don't want ruinous empathy, and that's where you actually have so much empathy that you don't speak the truth, that it ruins kind of the the potential outcomes that you could get. And in answer to your question, Eric, I think that it's not easy for team members or direct reports to be able to come to the authority or the leader and say, hey, I think you've really messed this up, and here's why I think you messed it up, and here's what could happen if we did it differently. I think that's a really challenging position for most people to be in, particularly if they have respect and rapport for the person that they're working with. And so I think it's really up to the leader to communicate, and this is another one of the things that I think leaders should have is excellent communication, to be impeccable with the word and to be able to communicate effectively. And I think Patrick Lencioni talks about in the 5 dysfunctions of the team the importance of having constructive conversations about things that can be approved and that can be improved. And I think he uses the terminology around vulnerability, that people need to have safety in being vulnerable, whereas I think sometimes what can happen is people might actually have the courage to come forward and share feedback, and yet they're often shut down with justifications or potentially consequences of sharing that feedback. So I think it really depends on the individual in terms of whether or not they're going to come forward. Some people are more mindful of how they might offend, and other people might be more focused on getting the outcome and being honest about that. So I think it's up to us as leaders to give permission to or to make clear the permission to be able to give feedback and take that on board.
Let me bring you to the question, the topic area that I've used throughout the podcasting. And I'm not going to not ask you this question because I think it's worth exploring. Nature versus nurture. So do you believe leaders are born or they're made?
Oh, it's such an interesting question, and the truth is I think you can argue both ways. I think that you can come up with valid arguments for both. I think.
So you're a fence sitter, hey? Okay,
no,
great.
Not a fence sitter. I'm in the area of helping people to be, the best version of themselves today, and what can they learn to be an even better version of themselves tomorrow and the next day, and those sorts of things. So I think for me to say that it was only nature would be unbelievably hypocritical. And I've seen people who had no leadership skills, put time, energy, commitment into learning skills to become better leaders who are very well revered by their teams. And so I think that if I was forced to argue one way or the other, I would definitely say that it's about nurturing, and I think that people will be the best version of a leader that they can put in. What they put into their learning will allow them to be the best version of themselves today. And I truly believe that, really fantastic leaders are people who are ever evolving leaders. There's always something to learn. And we talked about it very briefly earlier, that the concept of feedback and getting that feedback. I think that the two most dangerous words in the English language is to just say, I know. And it's almost like, people put up a giant hand. I don't know if you remember from the 90s when they used to say things like talk to the hand. And to me, when people say, oh, I know all that already, that's like putting up a hand, and we miss the opportunity to potentially learn something. It might be a slight tweak or a 1%er that just makes us handle that situation a little bit better the next time it comes to the forefront. And so I certainly believe that there are some people that have it in their nature to, seek out being a leader more than others. Like, for example, there might be, people who perhaps have, in the disc profiling, a high D personality. And so they might, be more led towards being a leader than, say, somebody who might be, more a C or an S. But that doesn't mean that there aren't amazing leaders that have learnt skills regardless of their natural disposition towards it.
Just let me expand on this a little bit if I can, because that's a fantastic answer, and a couple of extra elements. So I had as a guest a gentleman by the name of Mike House, and I asked him this exact question, and then he threw me a curveball, which I thought was great because I'm now using it in the discussion. So thank you, Mike, for putting this out there. But I think there's a couple of additional elements that I'd like your feedback on, if you think they're relevant or not. That one, leadership is always a choice. So whether you're born or made, you've got to make a decision to be in the leadership headspace. And number two, that leadership at its core is about having a lifelong learning mindset. And that I think those things are critical to that discussion. So what would your view on those two things be?
I think everything that we do is a choice and a decision. And I think decisive action and understanding your choices is one of the most important parts of that continuous evolution as a leader, which is one of the reasons why I'm a big advocate for feedback both before and after decisions. Sometimes you can make a great decision, you can get a great result, but if you don't do any self-reflection or you don't do any can-I, then, you might miss critical things that could make it even better. So the choice to be decisive, the choice to be reflective, the choice to seek out more, the choice to engage. I think that there's so many elements of leadership that actually are choices, and there are people who make choices, and everybody makes a choice. There are people who make choices that support their leadership, and there are people that make choices that perhaps diminishes their leadership. And I've had some interesting discussions with some of the organizations that I coach and mentor in this space just this week around exactly that. And different people have different psychologies, therefore they make different choices based on their filters. So that I definitely agree with. And in terms of the continuous and never-ending improvement and the evolution over time, I think that my answers so far obviously give you the idea that I'm definitely an advocate for that, and I 100% agree. There's an evolution that happens, and a willingness to understand that depending on who you're leading, your style may need to adapt also. So having more scope in terms of the leadership skills and that flexibility to be able to manage. A simple example would be your style may not work if you have a team of introverts versus a team of extroverts. You may need to be adaptable in that style. Something as simple as that can be the difference that makes the difference.
The situational nature and your style needing to adapt to others, that's, again, it's part of the art form, that if you're not thinking about those things, and if things go wrong, then when you do a post-mortem of why the hell are we at where we're at, then those are the things that you need to be looking at. But again, I think it assumes that you're prepared to be self-reflective, because I have met human beings in my life that would understand self-reflection if you put it
in pace.
Yeah, so this is what self-reflection. No, that's not. I don't understand that. And they're not. I really believe with some people they're hardwired not to want to do that stuff, and it goes so against the grain that it's not something that they're prepared to engage with. And I know that human potential is, I've heard it said it's limitless and we can change ourselves if we want to, but I've met human beings that's not the case. The roadblock's there and you're never going to change the roadblock ever.
And this is where it comes back to desire, Eric. I totally agree with you. Like, are people hardwired for some things being, one way or the other? 100%, our impacts in our childhood, our adolescent years, can help to shape a person and some of their preferences. Now, I'm a big believer, as I do a lot of stuff in human behavior as part of the work that we do, I'm a big believer that people can change those hardwired preferences if they have a desire to. And I've seen people do that where, they may have been incredibly introverted. They were going after a career where they needed to engage with more people. And so they learnt certain styles of being able to be more, socially charged and, to actually interact with others more frequently. And, these are things that you can learn skills to be able to adapt to your behavior if people want to. And, as far as the hardwiring is concerned, there's so much research around the neuroplasticity of the brain that even if we have pathways that have been hardwired for many years, with desire, we can actually, change those things, which is one of the reasons why I'm so, supercharged towards helping people find their buy-in for why they want to do things.
The buy-in is the critical bit. So you're only going to be able to change if you really want to do it. And that, that's a decision you've got to make. Look, this has been a fantastic discussion. And let me finish by asking you this. Looking back on your career, your pathway that you've chosen to take, what would Chandell say to a younger version of herself about being a more effective leader?
Wow, that's a great question. I think as I assess all the different experiences that I've had over the years, there's definitely, it's not been smooth sailing, as I'm sure for many of the listeners, maybe even yourself, that we all have challenges and obstacles that we come across. And some of them impact us emotionally more than others. And some of them slow us down. Some of them may even cause, some people to potentially question everything and maybe even decide that they're not cut out for certain things that they were striving towards. And so, for me personally, one of the things that I would reflect on if I had an opportunity to go back and visit my past self, I would remind myself that every single obstacle represents an opportunity for growth. And I suppose this fits into that self-reflection, because if I think about some of the things that have been most challenging and most difficult to swallow or to learn from, or to, really allow myself the opportunity to assess and dissect and really look at my blind spots. I'm sure you're familiar with the Johari window where, we have things that are known to us, things that are, our blind spots, of course. And so if I think about, those things and that assessment, it's been out of those most challenging moments that I've been able to get the most benefit and the most growth. And so it's one of the reasons why I say to people that the moment before the breakdown is often the moment before the breakthrough. So hang on. So if I was able to go back and talk to my younger self, I would perhaps, educate myself earlier along the way that not getting your way all the time doesn't necessarily have to be a catastrophe. It might be just the medicine that you needed to be able to do the analysis that gives you the skills that will, help your growth and your evolution. I think as a more mature person, I'm definitely more willing to accept that and get the lessons faster these days. So
thank you, Chandell. Look, before we go, over to you to just give a bit of an overview as to what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, no problem at all. Look, I want to say thank you to you, Eric, for having me on the show, and thank you to the listeners for tuning in. I trust that there's been something valuable that you can take away. And so at Life Puzzle, as I said before, we're super passionate about helping people to, learn the skills that they need to bridge the gap between the 80% psychology and the 20% strategy. And so we have a number of different trainings that, help people to understand a little bit more around the mechanics of neuro-linguistic programming, or how to look at, sales and influence from a different perspective. And so we'd love to, have you get in touch if you want to. You can reach us at lifepuzzle.com.au, or alternatively, we also have a gift for your audience today. If anybody would like to access my book, The Confident Closing: Sales Secrets That Grew a Business by 400% in 6 months, how they can work for you. There's a very big element of leadership and psychology in that book. So we'd love to gift an audio copy to your audience if they want to access it. I'll give you all the details on how they can grab that.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. So for those listening, this has been Talking Leadership. Thank you for joining us again. As always, more content on the way. And thank you again, Chandell, for your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you all on the next podcast.